Captain Naomi Carter had always dreamed of flying. As a child, she would sit by her bedroom window, gazing up at the sky, watching airplanes streak across the horizon. The thought of soaring above the clouds, of being in control of a massive jetliner, filled her with an unshakable sense of purpose. It was a dream that she had worked tirelessly to achieve, pushing past every obstacle thrown her way. She had graduated at the top of her class in flight school, spent years climbing the ranks in the aviation industry, and finally earned her place as a captain for Aurora Airlines. Her name was well respected in the industry, her skills unmatched, and her leadership in the cockpit was nothing short of inspiring. But despite all her achievements, Naomi still faced resistance, because she was a black woman in a field dominated by men. It was a crisp morning at JFK International Airport when Naomi arrived for her scheduled flight to London. Dressed in her neatly pressed navy blue captain's uniform, she carried herself with confidence as she approached the crew entrance. She had made this trip countless times before, but today, something felt different. As she made her way to the gate, she noticed a few passengers glancing at her uniform, their eyes flickering with surprise. Some even whispered to one another, as if the idea of a black female pilot was something foreign to them. Naomi was used to it. She had dealt with the doubters her entire career, but today she pushed the thoughts aside. Her focus was on getting the plane safely to its destination. When she reached the security checkpoint for the crew, a middle-aged gate agent with a stern expression blocked her path. His name tag read Walter Kingston, and the look on his face made it clear that he didn't believe she belonged there. "Can I help you?" Walter asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "I'm Captain Naomi Carter, scheduled to pilot Flight 672 to London," she replied, handing over her airline ID and credentials. Walter barely glanced at them before shaking his head. "Nice try, but the real pilots have already checked in. This area is restricted to crew members only." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "I am the crew. I'm the captain of this flight." Walter let out a dry chuckle, crossing his arms. "Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but I don't have time for games. Why don't you take a seat in the waiting area like everyone else?" The condescension in his voice made Naomi's stomach turn, but she remained composed. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, and she knew exactly how to handle situations like this. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice steady, "if you check your system, you'll see my name listed as the captain for this flight. Now, if you'd kindly step aside, I have a plane to fly." Walter scoffed. "Look, I don't need to check anything. I know what a real pilot looks like," and before he could finish, another flight attendant, Maria Lopez, walked up, recognizing Naomi immediately. "Captain Carter, good morning." Maria greeted her warmly before noticing the tension in the air. She glanced between Naomi and Walter, quickly piecing together what was happening. "Is there a problem here?" Walter hesitated, his face growing red as he realized that he might have made a mistake. "She claims to be the pilot," he muttered, as if still unconvinced. Maria's expression hardened. "She doesn't claim to be anything. She is our captain. You need to let her through. Now." Walter's face twitched with frustration, but before he could argue further, a senior airline official approached, having overheard the commotion. "What's going on here?" the official, Mr. Hayes, asked. Maria spoke up first. "Walter is refusing to let Captain Carter through. He won't check her credentials." Mr. Hayes turned to Walter with a frown. "Is that true?" Walter shifted uncomfortably. "I just thought." "You thought wrong," Mr. Hayes interrupted firmly. He then turned to Naomi, his expression apologetic. "Captain Carter, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. Please go ahead to the cockpit." Naomi nodded, giving Walter one last look before walking past him. But as she walked away, she couldn't ignore the murmurs from a few nearby employees, the whispers questioning whether she truly deserved her position. Little did they know, this incident was just the beginning. Before the flight would even take off, something far more shocking was about to happen. Something that would shake the entire airline industry to its core. As Naomi Carter walked toward the jet bridge, She couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. The encounter with Walter Kingston wasn't the first time she had been doubted, but the sheer audacity of his refusal to acknowledge her as a pilot made her blood boil. She had worked too hard for too long to let ignorance and discrimination define her career. Stepping into the cockpit of the Boeing 787, she was greeted by her first officer, Daniel Reeves, a seasoned co-pilot she had flown with before. "Captain Carter," Daniel greeted her with a nod. "Everything all set?" Naomi forced a smile. "Almost. Just had a little issue at the gate. Seems like some people still can't believe I belong here." Daniel sighed. "Unbelievable. You'd think by now people would be past this nonsense." Naomi shook her head. "Apparently not. But let's focus. Pre-flight checklist." As they went through the standard procedures, Naomi's sharp eyes scanned every detail of the cockpit. She was meticulous, and for good reason. One small oversight in aviation could mean disaster. But as she reviewed the paperwork, a strange inconsistency caught her attention. "Wait a minute," she muttered, flipping through the documents. Daniel looked over. "Something wrong." Naomi's brows furrowed. "The flight manifest shows that our assigned first officer should be Captain Richard Mills, not you." Daniel frowned. "That's strange. I was called in this morning as a last-minute replacement. Dispatch said Mills called out sick." Naomi nodded but felt something was off. She had flown with Mills before. He was one of the most punctual and dedicated pilots she knew. The last-minute change wasn't unheard of, but something didn't sit right. Still, she set the thought aside and continued reviewing the documents. But then another red flag. "Daniel, look at this." She pointed to a maintenance log. The report claimed that a minor engine issue had been resolved the previous evening, but there was no signature from the maintenance chief. Standard protocol required a final verification signature before any aircraft could be cleared for takeoff. Daniel's expression darkened. "That's not right. Every maintenance check requires a final approval. Why would they skip that?" Naomi didn't have an answer yet, but she intended to find out. Before takeoff, Naomi decided to call the airline's operations control center to clarify the maintenance issue. The response she received sent chills down her spine. "Captain Carter, everything is fine," the supervisor on the other end said. "That report was an error in documentation. You have clearance to fly." "An error," Naomi repeated, unconvinced. "That's a serious safety oversight. I need confirmation from the maintenance chief before we depart." There was a brief pause before the supervisor responded, his tone sharper. "Captain, I suggest you focus on your flight. We have already addressed this internally. Please proceed with departure." Naomi clenched her jaw. Something was being hidden, and she had just stumbled into it. She ended the call and turned to Daniel. "They're brushing it off." Daniel exhaled slowly. "What do you want to do?" Naomi knew she had two choices: ignore the red flags and take off as scheduled, or push back against the system and risk her career. The decision was easy. Naomi made her way out of the cockpit and into the terminal, her heart pounding. She needed to find someone from the maintenance team to confirm whether the aircraft was truly flight-ready. As she stepped into the operations area, she spotted an engineer, a young man named Luis who had worked with the airline for years. "Luis," she called out. He turned, looking surprised. "Captain Carter? Something wrong." Naomi held up the maintenance log. "This report says the engine issue was resolved, but there's no clearance signature. Can you confirm if the plane is actually safe to fly?" Luis hesitated. His eyes darted around, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Captain, I don't think I can talk about this here." Naomi's pulse quickened. "That means something is wrong, doesn't it?" Luis exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything, but that plane wasn't fully cleared. There were still concerns about the left engine. Management told us to hurry the process along, because they didn't want delays." Naomi's stomach turned. The airline was willing to risk the safety of hundreds of passengers just to stay on schedule. "Why didn't you report this?" she asked. Luis scoffed bitterly. "We did, but when we pushed back, they threatened to fire us." Naomi clenched her fists. She had suspected corruption within the airline before, but now she had proof. They were cutting corners on safety, silencing employees, and now they were trying to pressure her into flying a compromised aircraft. She refused to be a part of it. As Naomi turned to head back, she suddenly found herself face to face with none other than Richard Whitmore, the airline's director of operations. His expression was cold, calculated. "Captain Carter, I hear you've been asking some unnecessary questions." Naomi crossed her arms. "There's nothing unnecessary about questioning a potential safety violation." Whitmore stepped closer. "We run a tight schedule here, Captain. Passengers trust us to get them to their destinations on time. We can't afford disruptions." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "You mean you can't afford to let the truth come out?" Whitmore's smile was thin. "Let me make something clear. If you delay this flight, if you go digging where you shouldn't, there will be consequences." Naomi's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Is that a threat?" Whitmore leaned in. "It's a warning." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Naomi standing in the middle of the terminal, her mind racing. She had uncovered something bigger than she anticipated. The airline wasn't just discriminating against her, they were endangering lives, and now they were trying to silence her. But Naomi Carter wasn't one to back down. If they thought she would stay quiet, they had seriously underestimated her. Naomi Carter sat in her apartment, staring at the email draft on her laptop screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she reread the words she had typed. "To the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, I am formally reporting a serious safety violation by SkyWest Elite Airlines." She took a deep breath and hit send. There was no turning back now. After her confrontation with Richard Whitmore, Naomi knew she couldn't stay silent. The airline had put hundreds of lives at risk by cutting corners on aircraft maintenance. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to allow this corruption to continue. If exposing the truth meant sacrificing her career, so be it. But she wasn't stopping at the FAA. Naomi pulled out her phone and recorded a video, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "My name is Captain Naomi Carter, and I have been a commercial airline pilot for over a decade. Today, I was denied access to my own cockpit because of the color of my skin. But that's not the real story. The real story is that SkyWest Elite Airlines is endangering passengers by ignoring safety protocols. They are silencing employees who speak up, and I refuse to be one of them." She uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "Passengers deserve to know the truth. Hashtag SkyWest Elite Exposed." Within minutes, the post started gaining traction. Retweets, shares, and comments flooded in. People were outraged, not just about the blatant racism Naomi had faced, but about the airline's willingness to compromise safety. A few hours later, her phone buzzed. "Naomi, it's Angela from Channel 7 News. We'd love to have you on for an exclusive interview. The public needs to hear your story." The next morning, Naomi received an email from SkyWest Elite's HR department. Subject: immediate suspension. "Captain Carter, due to recent unauthorized public statements damaging to the company's reputation, you are hereby placed on indefinite suspension pending further investigation." Naomi exhaled sharply. She had expected this. Shortly after, SkyWest Elite released their own statement. SkyWest Elite Airlines takes all allegations seriously and is conducting an internal review. "We assure our passengers that our safety standards meet all federal regulations. The recent claims made by Captain Carter are misleading and do not reflect the integrity of our airline." Naomi laughed bitterly. An internal review? She knew what that meant. Damage control. Despite the airline's attempts to silence her, the public was on Naomi's side. Under the airline's statement, thousands of people flooded the comments. "You're saying she's the problem instead of addressing the safety concerns? Wow. If a pilot is willing to risk her career to expose this, then there's something seriously wrong. Boycott SkyWest Elite. We need safer skies." More former employees came forward, sharing their own horror stories about the company's disregard for regulations. Even passengers spoke out, recalling past incidents where they had felt unsafe. Naomi's inbox was flooded with messages of support. Fellow pilots, flight attendants, and aviation professionals reached out, thanking her for her courage. Some even offered to testify on her behalf. With the help of civil rights attorneys, Naomi filed a lawsuit against SkyWest Elite Airlines for racial discrimination and gross negligence. The case gained national attention, and soon, federal investigators began looking into the airline's maintenance records. What they found was worse than Naomi had anticipated. Dozens of violations, improper inspections, suppressed reports from mechanics who had been pressured to sign off on unfit planes. The airline was in deep trouble. 1 week later, Naomi sat across from Richard Whitmore in a high-stakes arbitration meeting. Journalists had gathered outside, waiting for the verdict. "Captain Carter," Whitmore said, forcing a smile, "surely we can come to a quiet resolution. Drop the lawsuit and we'll reinstate you. Full salary, no questions asked." Naomi leaned forward. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about my job. This is about the lives you've put at risk. And I will not stop until the truth comes out." Before Whitmore could respond, the doors burst open. A federal investigator stepped inside, holding a thick folder. "SkyWest Elite Airlines is now under federal investigation. Until further notice, your fleet is grounded." Whitmore's face drained of color. Naomi smiled. "I believe this meeting is over." As she walked out of the room, cameras flashed and reporters swarmed around her. She took a deep breath, looking into the sea of microphones. This isn't just about one pilot. This is about every airline employee who's been silenced. This is about every passenger who trusts airlines with their lives. Today, we took the first step toward accountability. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a voice for change. The walls were closing in on SkyWest Elite Airlines. After Captain Naomi Carter's exposé went viral, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, launched an immediate and comprehensive investigation. What they uncovered was far worse than anyone had imagined. FAA officials combed through the airline's maintenance logs, employee testimonies, and financial records. What they found was a horrifying pattern of negligence and corruption. Routine maintenance had been skipped, with mechanics pressured to sign off on incomplete inspections. Unqualified pilots had been hired, some barely meeting flight hour requirements. Reports of equipment malfunctions had been ignored, with faulty aircraft still being put into service. Employees who had previously raised concerns were fired or silenced. It wasn't just about one isolated incident. This was systemic fraud and endangerment. The airline had been cutting costs at the expense of passenger safety for years, gambling with lives to increase profits. When these revelations came to light, the media frenzy intensified. News channels ran exposés, whistleblowers came forward, and legal experts began debating how deep the consequences would run. Under mounting pressure from the public, regulatory authorities, and lawmakers, the FAA made a historic decision. SkyWest Elite Airlines was officially grounded until further notice. For the first time in decades, an airline of this size was forced to halt all operations overnight. Thousands of flights were canceled, passengers were stranded, and stocks plummeted as investors fled the scandal-ridden company. Major news outlets reported the downfall live. Breaking news: SkyWest Elite Airlines faces federal investigation over safety violations, entire fleet grounded. Exclusive: passengers speak out. We were flying in death traps without knowing. Special report: whistleblower pilot Naomi Carter sparks nationwide reform. As the CEO of SkyWest Elite, Richard Whitmore had long operated with impunity. But now his empire was crumbling. With investigators breathing down his neck, Whitmore made a desperate attempt to save himself. He issued a public apology, claiming that he had been unaware of the extent of the violations and blaming lower management for failing to address the issues. But it was too late. Under subpoena, internal emails and documents surfaced, revealing that Whitmore had personally ordered cost-cutting measures that endangered passengers. He had approved falsified safety reports, ignored warnings from engineers, and orchestrated the firing of employees who spoke out. Soon, federal prosecutors stepped in, charging Whitmore with fraud, gross negligence, and obstruction of justice. Facing years in prison, he resigned in disgrace. With the airline in shambles and Whitmore facing legal action, Naomi Carter became more than just a pilot. She became a national hero. Her lawsuit was victorious. Not only did she receive a public apology, but she was also awarded a settlement, one she chose to donate to aviation safety programs and scholarships for aspiring black pilots. But more importantly, her fight led to real change. The scandal sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. As a result of Naomi's case, new federal laws were passed to prevent airlines from cutting corners on maintenance and pilot qualifications. Stronger whistleblower protections were implemented to ensure employees could report safety violations without fear of retaliation. Diversity initiatives were introduced to combat discrimination in the aviation field, ensuring that pilots were treated based on skill, not race. Months later, Naomi sat on a stage at an aviation conference, addressing a room full of aspiring pilots. "I never set out to bring down an airline," she said. "I just wanted to do my job, to fly, to protect my passengers, and to make sure that every pilot, no matter their background, has the same opportunity." The audience erupted in applause. She had gone from being a pilot silenced for speaking the truth to a leader who changed the industry. As she walked off stage, Naomi received a phone call. It was a major airline offering her a new position, as a captain and a consultant for safety reform. She smiled. Her career wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you were inspired by Naomi's story, make sure to like this post, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and justice.